Welcome. Glad to have you with us today. We're going to talk about changes that are coming for the project management professional exam. And I will jump us over. Brent has kicked us off, and I'm sure introduced me. So we'll jump right to our content. The exam is going to change. It was supposed to change the 1st of this month, but that's been delayed due to the pandemic and all of the ripple effects of that and what we've been trying to do to adjust. So we're going to talk about those changes and when they're going to take place, what's going to be different on the exam, and we're going to talk about how those changes to the exam relate to the project management body of knowledge. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. As I go through, if you have questions, feel free to submit those. Use the Q&A function you've got access to. Submit those. Brent will help me try to keep track of them, and we'll answer them in the end. The PMBOK guide is currently in its 6th edition. That's not going to change until they publish the 7th edition, which is going to happen on the normal 4-year or so cycle of refresh that PMI uses for the project management body of knowledge. Based on that roughly 4-year refresh cycle, should see the 7th edition come out around 4th quarter 2020, 1st quarter 2021, somewhere in that neighborhood. Which means that until that comes out and the grace period that PMI always gives us runs out, all of the questions on the exam are going to be related to what's in the current project management body of knowledge, and that's the 6th edition. Right? The exam changes from time to time based on a role delineation study that PMI does, and they do those role delineation studies, at least historically, every 5 to 7 years or so. Based on the last one done, we're seeing the changes that PMI is going to bring out for the exam. The questions on the exam have always been based predominantly on what's in the PMBOK, but never limited to only what's in the PMBOK. And with the new exam, that continues to be true, and there's going to be some, I think, more significant attention to knowing information outside of the PMBOK. As a matter of fact, as we get going in our presentation here, we're going to get a chance to look at a list of other kinds of resources that you may use as you study for this exam. So as we compare the new exam to the current exam, what we see is that the current exam is based on the current PMBOK with 5 process domains that are addressed in the exam: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. And you see the balance of questions across those 5 process domains. Each process domain, as you probably know if you've begun to study or have looked at getting certified in any depth at all, each process domain is made up of processes, and those processes have specific inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. And we, in order to pass the exam, need to understand the relationship among these process domains, the processes that make them up, what those processes are used for, and how those processes apply to managing a project. And most of the questions will focus around predictive approaches to project management, waterfall-like approaches to project management. On the new exam, those 5 performance domains we've come to know and love are reduced to only 3 performance domains: people, process, and business environment. And most of the exam is going to focus around process and people. As you can see, 92% of the exam is focused there. But 8% is going to focus on the business environment. And rather than being made up of knowledge areas and skills, these process domains are defined on the basis of tasks and enablers. But perhaps the biggest change we're going to see in the new exam is its focus. And its focus is going to broaden to cover the full range of value delivery approaches that are in practice in project management, which means predictive, adaptive, agile in all of its varieties, and those hybrid approaches that use some of the characteristics of a predictive approach and some of the characteristics of an adaptive approach. And the balance in those questions, which will remain, by the way, 200 questions on the exam, will be about 50-50. So about half of those questions focused still on waterfall approaches, the other half focused on agile and hybrid approaches to doing projects. So if we're changing from 5 performance domains down to 3, and our focus in those domains is changing, then let's take a look at that. The domain defines an area of knowledge, high level, and then the tasks define the responsibilities we have within that domain, and the enablers give us examples of what we need to be doing to fulfill our responsibilities within that domain. The tasks listed are not all of the tasks that might apply, but it gives us enough examples to have a clear grasp of what the domain is all about. In our people domain, we've got 14 tasks, and among those 14 tasks, 53 enablers. Process, 17 tasks and 61 enablers. And then Business domain, only 8% of the test, 4 tasks, 19 enablers. Obviously, I'm not trying to show you all of the tasks and all of the enablers, but I wanted to give you a sampling of them for each of the new performance domains. So in our people domain, we've not got all tasks listed, but performance around people, how do we manage them? So leadership, conflict, supporting team performance, empowering the team and other stakeholders, making sure the team has the skill that they need to do what we expect of them on the project. And then, of course, we can't talk about teams, we can't talk about people without talking about team building, particularly in a project management context. And then those are the tasks, examples of our enablers around build team. We need to deduce the kinds of resources required. We need to make sure the team has the skill and that we are paying attention to their skills, enabling their ability to refresh them as needed to meet the needs of our project. Okay. Around the idea of empowerment, focusing on strength in the way we put our team together, and trusting the team by delegating decision-making authority to them, by defining how decision-making will happen clearly, and a nod to the new focus on adaptive approaches to project management. Any of us who have had any exposure to Agile know that Agile assumes self-organizing and self-directed teams, which means our approach to leading a self-organized, self-directed team needs to be a servant leadership approach, where the leadership role is one of enablement and empowerment of that team. When we look at the process domain, again, we've got a bunch of examples. Okay. Execute the project with urgency. In other words, don't allow yourself or the team to be lulled into that mistaken perception that we've got plenty of time so we don't have to rush. Well, we all know probably from experience that no matter how much time we have ahead of us, it's almost never in the end the time that we wish we had had. So we need to approach our projects and create a sense of urgency. All right. Communication. Plan communication, focus on effective communication, build that communication plan around the communication and information needs of our stakeholders, and communicate in ways that enable and ensure that we're going to have bi-directional communication. Get feedback. We're going to understand the message. They're going to understand the message. We need to be focused on risk, and we need to establish how the project's going to be structured and how we're going to govern that project. But we also need to do the paperwork, manage that paperwork, our records and other project artifacts, and we need to manage them in a way that we can keep track of them. We know what the latest and greatest is as things change, and that those artifacts are appropriately accessible to those who may need them. Excuse me. And then, of course, we've got a plan for transition, moving our deliverables from the team to our stakeholders. We've got a plan for closure. In the business process, strategic and business area, business environment, we can look at all four, since there are only four of them. And our four tasks, as you see, planning and managing compliance, evaluating benefit and value, evaluating how the broader business environment is changing and how that affects our project, and recognizing that though our projects are temporary, the point of our project is to drive some kind of organizational change. And so we need to attend to managing the organizational change as well as those changes that occur within our projects. Well, the people domain overlaps with a lot of stuff in the current PMBOK. A lot of that stuff in the resource management knowledge area, but there's also some new stuff. The focus on servant leadership as the way project managers should be leading. The fact that we not only need to train, but we need to be able to show whether or not that training was effective, show the value from that training. And it started with the 6th edition and its addition of managed project knowledge in the executing performance domain, but there's added focus on that in the people domain. Right? And when we look to compare old to new, you can use this link to get a map that shows you the old process or performance domains and the new, and where they cross over, where they connect, what is similar and what is new. In our process domain, we're going to see a lot more attention to this notion of value and value delivery. And again, thanks to added focus on Agile, that is going to be focused on value delivery in an incremental way. We're going to see support the team by subdividing tasks and looking to produce minimum viable product. Again, an Agile concept. Producing just enough to give the stakeholder something that will meet their need, and doing that incrementally. But we also need to pay attention to the human characteristics of our human resources. Emotional intelligence, which we got some focus on in the 6th edition, but again, there will be more. Understanding personality and how to assess it, how to recognize indicators of personality traits, communication preferences, leadership preferences, etc. But the process domain is also going to put some emphasis on our ability to determine the most appropriate, or if you prefer, best fit approach for managing the project. Not all projects work as with predictive approaches, but not all projects work with Agile approaches. And if I'm going to use Agile, am I going to use disciplined Agile? Am I going to use Scrum? What of that extreme programming? There are a bunch of Agile variants out there. Which one's the best fit for what we're trying to do? Okay. And then in our business environment domain, again, focus on compliance, both in terms of making sure we comply, recognizing what kind of compliance areas or categories or issues are relevant to our project, what might threaten compliance, the consequences or penalties of non-compliance, and identifying options, doing trade-off analysis among those options, recommending an option, managing the project with attention to business priority, changes in business priority, and so forth. And recognizing that every project we do is done within the culture of the organization, and successful projects can't be completely countercultural in their approach. So we've got to be able to detect, to evaluate, and adapt to that organizational culture. Here's that list I mentioned earlier. The PMBOK will continue to be a primary source for the exam, but PMI's practice guide for Agile is another primary source we're going to need to pay much more attention to with the new exam. And then a bunch of other sources the systems approach to planning, scheduling, and controlling is in, I don't remember at this point, it's 9th or 10th edition, I think. I got my PMP 20 years ago. It was a recommended source back then. Continues to be relevant, but much more attention to Agile. Okay. Much more attention to technical project management. Okay. And you can grab this list, and there are other things on this list in addition from this link you see at the bottom of the slide. Fortunately, PMI was willing to adjust due to the impacts on all of us from the pandemic. And so they moved the launch for the new exam from July 1 to January 2021, which means the last day that the current exam will be administered is the 31st of December this year. Well, if you didn't pass your first attempt, you can retake it 2 more times. So, as you plan to take your exam, in order to give yourself all 3 opportunities, you don't want to wait past December 3rd, because you take it on December 3rd and you fail, you have to wait 2 weeks before you can retake it. So that would make it December 17th or so. And you take it then and you fail. You got to wait another week before you can take it the 3rd time. And that's going to put you at about Christmas Eve. But you can get all 3 attempts in there if you need them. But that really moves your deadline up to December 3rd. Right? It doesn't matter that you have spent hours and hours and weeks preparing. If you can't get your exam scheduled until the 2nd or 3rd of January, then you're going to be taking the new exam, not the current exam. Even if you took the current exam on the 3rd of December, 2nd attempt on the 17th of December, but you couldn't get a slot for your 3rd attempt until the 4th of January. Well, that 3rd attempt is going to be the new exam. Once December 31st passes out on the calendar, so at the stroke of midnight, December 31, 2020, the current exam goes away and PMI will not bring it back for any reason, under any circumstances. So make sure, if you want to take the current exam, which is the one that all of us who work to help you prepare know the most about, make sure you get it done before the end of the year. Now, there is some good news here. Prior to the pandemic, PMI only administered this exam through Pearson VUE. and you had to go to their their testing site in order to take the exam. Your only option was a center-based exam, but they have launched online exam. And so when you go to sign up, you decide, do you want to be center-based, go to a Pearson VUE site, or do you want to take it online? If you choose online, that online exam will be proctored. So there will be somebody watching you take the exam the entire time. You go to Pearson VUE's site, you can get the tech specs you need to know what's required to be able to take the online exam. You're going to check in at least 15 minutes before your exam schedule to go through the check-in process with your proctor. You're going to have to submit a headshot and show them your photo ID. You're then going to give the proctor a tour of the room where you're taking the exam. And of course, you've got to be in a room where you can clear the desk so that you have nothing on the desk that the proctor might worry about or suspect as a way for you to take advantage of not being at a training center. In the training center, this is a closed book exam. You walk in empty-handed to take it. They're going to verify you're taking it in your office or at home under the same circumstances. You have to be in a place where others aren't going to be coming and going or passing through. Once the exam begins, you have to stay within camera view. So make sure you've got a comfortable seat, because once the exam starts, you're there until you're done. And online, you don't get to bring your own scratch paper. Instead, the system will provide you with a calculator and a whiteboard where you can take notes, do your brain dump, etc. And the system will allow the calculator and whiteboard to both be up at the same time. And with the launch of online, PMI has also introduced a 10-minute break. And that 10-minute break happens in the middle, halfway through the exam. With that 10-minute break, you can stand, you can move out of the proctor's view, go to the bathroom, whatever, stretch. Okay. But the downside of this 10-minute break, which you get whether you want it or not, is that the 100 questions you've already answered, you can't go back and review anymore. So the new approach, you get 4 hours to complete 200 questions. When you get 100 questions done, you get a 10-minute break, and those questions are done. And then you come back from break and answer the other 200 questions. do not be late back from break, because the proctor will end your exam or disqualify you if you come back late from break. So you need to pay attention, be back on time. Better yet, be back a couple of minutes early from your break and be ready to go. All right, that gives you a pretty good summary of what is going on. All right.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I'll jump into these questions here in just a moment, but just wanted to remind everyone that if you have questions, please place them in the question and answer portion of your control panel. I know I've seen one or two come through in the chat and they get lost very quickly with all the back and forth. So anything you want answered, please put it in the Q&A. And again, I've enabled the upvote feature. So if you see a question you want answered, give it a little thumbs up and it'll bump to the top. All right, so we'll jump right in, Samuel. Did you explain that only authorized PMP courses can be delivered by ATP partners starting in January, using PMI-approved course content and by PMI-certified trainers?
I did not. And so I'm glad you brought that up. PMI is changing, and we used to be a registered education provider. Now we will be an authorized training partner, and PMI is standardizing the course material. So that too will change and be new in January.
Awesome. Great question, Greta. Thank you. Next question here. This seems like a vast change from the 5 process groups and 10 knowledge areas. Would you recommend people who have attended the PMP bootcamp course prior to the upcoming changes take the exam again?
No. If you've already taken the bootcamp, you've already taken your exam, you've got your PMP, there's no need to go back and retest, but you do want to get your 7th edition of the PMBOK and become familiar with it. The
Awesome.
7th edition, by the way, is going to be really different. I was just listening to a webinar this morning before we started this, and instead of processes, inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs, the 7th edition is going to move us to new performance domains and principle-based instead of process-based approach to defining what we need to know and do.
Perfect. Great question, Mel. Okay, next year. How long does it take to prepare for PMP? Is 3 months with 2 hours daily study enough?
Probably, but it varies depending on the person, obviously. Typically speaking, the recommendation for prep time for the exam is between 40 and 80 hours of study. So 2 hours a day for 3 months certainly gets you within that range of 40 to 80 hours.
Perfect. Thank you. How long do you have to take the exam?
All right. It's 200 multiple choice questions, and you get 4 hours to complete it, which means you end up with about 1 minute and 12 seconds to answer each question if we average it out.
Perfect. Okay, business environment is a very important part of PM. Can we imagine an environment which has only people in process? Any examples, please?
No, we really can't imagine an environment with only people in process. Projects happen because businesses want to change their status quo, And so all of that people and process stuff is always happening relative to the business environment and the justification on the basis of that environment for the change the project is trying to drive.
Perfect. If you have completed the boot camp course with 4,500 hours this year, can we leverage the same for the new exam on or after January 1st, or do we have to redo the eligibility again?
No, the eligibility requirements are not changing, at least as far as we know at this point, they are not changing. So if you've been qualified for the exam, then you're qualified for the exam, that's fine. You don't need to go back through the application process, right? You just need to, if you've taken a boot camp, remember that, realize that the boot camp you took was based on a test that will not exist anymore after January 1, and the new test is going to be putting emphasis in places the old test never did.
Perfect. Perfect. So if I enroll now for PMP training, can I still take the exam in January of 2021?
Absolutely. Once PMI authorizes you to take the exam, you have 12 full months to get around to doing that. So if you put in your application today and they authorize it on Saturday, then you've got from January 12th, 2020 to July 12th, 2020 to July 12th, 2021 to take your exam. Your only risk is studying between January and December is going to be focused on an exam that won't be the same after January 2021.
Thank you. Okay, I'm wrapping up the PMP bootcamp. However, haven't submitted my application process for testing approval. With a given time frame, do you think it's possible to take the exam by December?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Once you submit, and I would encourage you, go ahead and do it. All right, get it submitted. PMI will take up to 5 days to approve or reject your application. And then that 12-month clock I just talked about starts. But you've basically got 5.5 months. And even if you can only commit a couple hours a day to study, you should be able to be ready and take that exam in the November timeframe easily, probably earlier.
Awesome. Thank you, Samuel. Any prerequisite for the PMP exam?
Yeah, you gotta get approved by PMI, which means you've got to submit an application showing that you have 4,500 or 7,500 hours of project leadership experience in the last 8 years, and that you've had at least 35 hours of project management training. Now, 4,500 hours if you have a baccalaureate level degree, 7,500 hours if you've got anything less than a baccalaureate level degree. And you can go to pmi.org, certification, PMP, and download and review the PMP Exam Certification Handbook. And it will delineate all of the particulars for what you've got to put in your application to qualify.
Okay. Next question here. Okay. is the PMP certification for IT professionals different than PMP certification for other professionals? So do IT guys need to have a different pattern of questions for the exam?
No. The PMP certification from PMI is a generic certification. It's a certification of anyone in any industry managing any kind of projects as a project management professional.
Got it. The next question is, how can I improve that? So I'm not sure what they're talking about, but I'll say with practice and hard work and perseverance.
I like that answer.
Okay. So in your experience, what is the most successful preparation plan, i.e. study schedule, reference material, boot camp, study groups?
All of the above. What I recommend, well, one, have a schedule and a structure for your study. Trying to do it piecemeal, catch as catch can, rarely works for people. So be disciplined and have a schedule. Then my recommendation, find and take as many practice tests as you can. I recommend when I teach the boot camp that folks take at least 2,000 questions worth of practice tests minimum as they study. And then as you take your practice test, score it, and then use your reference material, the PMBOK and other sources, to go back and look up the right answers to those things you miss in all those practice tests. And if you keep focusing on looking up the right answers to things you miss as you take exams, practice exams, that tends to help reinforce that stuff. And you'll find over the course of taking different exams, not the same one over and over, that the range of things you're missing narrows. And folks who can get to about 85% success on practice exams usually do well when they take the real exam, usually pass the first time.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll take about 3 more questions here, and then we'll let Samuel off the hook. So with the 6th edition, I can only take the exam before December 31st. For exams to be taken in January 2021, we need to study the 7th edition.
No and yes. No, if you take the exam in January, it is still based on the 6th edition. It just will not be based on the same test blueprint. So you're okay there. PMI typically gives us about 60 to 90 days after a new PMBOK comes out before they start testing on the basis of the new PMBOK. So you've got a window of opportunity anyway. And then Brent, I see the next question about passing requirements. Unfortunately, we don't know. PMI doesn't share what those passing requirements are. They score each section of the current exam. So your exam's based on the 5 performance domains, and they're going to score how you do in initiating, in planning, in executing, in monitoring and controlling, and in closing. We
Perfect.
just don't know what the level is you've got to hit to pass each of those areas.
Gotcha. Okay, so last question, and I know we still have a few questions trickling in. So after Simon answers this, I would just encourage anyone that has questions about PMP or really anything to hit up Global Knowledge on any of our social accounts like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever. Let's make our social media folks earn their paychecks. They're happy to answer your questions, and if they don't know the answer, they can hook you up with someone who can. So, all right, last question, Samuel, and again, appreciate you joining us today. I know this is your lunch break, so
Not
give
a
you a few minutes
problem.
to gobble down a hot pocket or something. Okay. As someone who has never done PMP training before, should I take boot camp or is there another training available? I want to take the exam in September 2020.
All right. That's a good question. I would recommend that you at least take a boot camp. The boot camp is focused on the exam and preparing you for that exam. So it's going to be your best, most direct preparation for the certification exam. If you've never had any kind of project management training before, then it is probably worth taking a course like our Project Management Fundamentals, or if you're in IT, our IT Project Management course, which are good introductory level courses and that are consistent with everything that you then hear about for the exam when you take your boot camp. But you definitely want to take that boot camp course to get ready for the exam.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you again, Samuel. And I hope that everyone has enjoyed today's webinar. If you'd like to learn more about these topics, we recommend you check out Global Knowledge's website. We've got a ton of different things on there related to project management. And as an attendee of today's webinar, we want to make it easy for you to take the next step. So if you use the discount code webinar25 or CA webinar 25 in Canada, you can get 25% off your next Global Knowledge course. And again, please be sure to continue to visit Global Knowledge's website for access to additional free resources. It's not just webinars, we also have technical articles and white papers. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks again, Samuel. Really appreciate you enlightening everyone and taking the time to take so many questions. Everyone have a great day and be well.
Thanks so much. Always my pleasure.